A downpour, coming down from the sky, and a little girl standing under a street lamp. Her clothes were all tattered and dirty, and her eyes were fixed on the sun. She slowly rummaged in her pockets and took out one small coin and burst into tears. I just wanted to be happy. Greater than the poor girl's words came out of the girl's mouth. And at the moment, bang, an unknown thing arrives at her and she falls off her feet in convulsions. 4 men in robes approach her, and something weaving about slaves takes the poor little girl. She was taken to the mansion of the Count, the psychopath Count. The sick man was delivering crisp slaps right on the little girl's soft skin. She begged for forgiveness and trembled with fear and pain, but the Count did not like it, and he apparently decided to finish off the little girl when suddenly a lilac-haired elf stops her. Elphika also begged to stop beating the child, but the finished Count is of such resistance decides to punish the elf, and puts the white-haired girl in front of the choice, bring a club or be punished. The girl decides the first thing, and brings the stick to her owner. This bastard is right in front of the white-haired girl, delivering a lot of heavy blows with an iron stick to the elf. And apparently this scum is enjoying everything he does. In the end, the Count directly taunts them by calling them commoners and just pushes them psychologically by calling them his slaves. Some time passes, and the little girl in Elphika's arms is sobbing and crying, and Elphika in turn tries to calm her down. The girl asks for forgiveness for not being able to save the lilac-haired girl from the Count, but the elf pats her on the head, says something that shocked the little girl. She talked about plans to burn down the entire house in the coming hours. Elphika tells the girl to go to the top of the mountain. Some time passes, and in front of us is this picture. A lilac-haired elf is lying in blood and the Count is holding a stick in his hands and grinning maliciously. This bastard with a smile on his face tells that Elphika was planning an arson attack, and that he was able to stop her. And seeing the cloak on the girl suspects her too, trying to grab her. The Count does not succeed and the white-haired woman runs as fast as she can towards the mountains. A whole squad is sent after her in search, but she continues to run to the mountains in search of salvation. Climbing to the mountain, a completely white door stands in front of her, and in hopes of salvation, she knocks on this door and asks for help. As a result, she falls down without strength, and after a couple of moments the door opens and a man comes out of it. An ordinary man in a jacket and shorts. He takes her in. In the next page, he is sitting smoking by the door and a Count with 2 big men nervously approaches him. The Count greeting the man tells about the search for his slave. Describing the little girl, he asks if he has seen her. But the man in a calm tone replies that the girl is not inside. This tone did not please the Count and he begins to run over the man in his aggressive manner, and then threaten violence. The Count and 2 big men go inside the door and see the sky in front of them. White sky and clouds. As he looks up at the sky in surprise, the door abruptly closes behind him. The man abruptly demolishes the Count's bullies in a split second, and moves on to the Count himself. The man in the jacket begins to beat the Count with clear slaps. And at one point the Count himself enters the role of a little girl. Trembling with fear and pain, the Count asks for forgiveness, but the peasant in contempt finishes off this Count with a savory chapelak. The man throws their bodies outside, and starts lighting his cigarette, sitting at the very edge of his door. A couple of minutes and finishing a cigarette, a man in a jacket throws out a bowl and closes the door behind him, and finds himself in his white world. He yawns lazily and looks at his clouds all by himself. Look to the right and then there is the same little girl in bed, who is sleeping hugging her pillows. The man calls her sharply, and the girl wakes up in an instant in a cold sweat. Looking at her hands, she is surprised at the healing of her wounds, and getting out of bed does not understand the count of time. But when she looks up, she's more surprised by the whole place. The man slowly approaches her, but the girl is afraid of him, and suddenly strikes at the man, asking about who he is. A girl in a sweat sloppily stands in her fighting stance, but the man in the jacket stroking his bangs replies, "And that's how you feel about the person who saved you." The man calls her to him, but the girl clearly does not trust this man, but still follows him. A man in a jacket opens the door, and the white-haired woman sees this picture, the unconscious body of the Count and his 2 goons. The girl is certainly surprised, but at that time the man interrupts her surprise and asks if he is her master. But even so, the girl is not very happy with this arrangement of affairs, and trembling with fear, tears appear in her eyes. The man suddenly says that he was attacked by a bear, and he just closed the door. The girl does not believe all this, and confirms this by saying that the Count was not an ordinary person and that he could cope with 1 bear. But the guy adds that there were 100 bears here, and then the girl runs out of arguments. A man in a jacket takes out an umbrella, and passing it to the girl tells her to go. The girl of course went. Taking a couple of steps forward, she stopped and trembled. She turns to the peasant and takes out a coin from her pocket, asks him to kill the Count for this fee. The girl adds that she is powerless, and until the Count dies, all the violence against her will continue. A couple of moments and she is on her knees begging her savior to kill the Count. But the man lazily responds with the usual "I don't want to" and starts putting the girl in his position. But the white-haired woman does not calm down and increasingly asks and begs to kill the count and supports this with money. But it turns out that the peasant has no problems with this. But the girl still continues to beg her savior. But suddenly the guy notices the ring on the girl's hands and is very surprised by it, and asks her about the ring. And the girl takes advantage of this and offers a deal to the guy, murder for information about the ring. The man in laughter agrees, but still sets his own conditions, and this condition was 1. Just go to his door. The girl of course silently goes to him, and the door instantly slams behind her. The guy comes to the door, and lifting it just throws it into the stratosphere, while the white-haired woman just watches this spectacle in shock. A screaming girl hits a man with an umbrella and calls him a liar. At the moment of BABAH, and out of nowhere there is a stove, and out of the stove comes a man in a black robe, and begins to yell in a satisfied full hair. Both of them start greeting each other and they start talking about the white-haired one. The conversation was in full swing, but at the moment Adele asks one favor, give him a contract. The robed man snaps his finger and a huge portal to another world appears from below. At one point, Adele mentions the condition, and adds that the argument would be fair. A huge portal served as something like a stone for runes where the terms of the contract were written. Adele throws the seed to the girl and gives one condition that within 24 hours, if it sprouts, he will recognize the victory of the girl and kill the count. All this is recorded in a stone, and then a peasant in a robe asking for the name of Ribe writes it down to the stone. Ribe asks about the stone, and the peasant replies that he writes down the conditions, bids and other information and adds that everything indicated on the stone must be fulfilled, because there is an oath in the name of God. All the demands written on stone cannot be refuted or challenged in any way. These were the words of the robed man, and with a wave of his finger, 3 demands appear on the Ribe chain. 1. The owner will become a slave. 2. Slaves cannot go against their master. 3. Slaves are not allowed to use magic power. The man taps the ground with a stick and puts the cupcake evenly on the stick, and the snail Darupin appears next to it. Darupin's journey to the cupcake takes 24 hours. If the seed sprouts during this time, then the victory is for Ribe, otherwise the victory is for Adele. Ribe can also address her requests to the man. All her requests will be provided. Adele calmly agrees to this condition, and Ribe nods in agreement with a slight hesitation. Ribe will think carefully about this demand, and at the moment it gives out that if she wins, she takes everything that Adele has, that is, to make Adele her slave. Adele is thrilled by this turn of events, but still agrees. But his demands were just whispered to the man and written on a stone. The contract was fully satisfied and the dispute begins from now on. Holding the seed in her hands, Ribe begins to realize what she has gotten herself into, and begins to doubt the ability to make these seeds sprout in 24 hours. Approaching the robed man sitting there, Ribe slowly asks for extra time, but he laughs at this request and refuses, because this request is against the rules. Ribe thinks a little and this time asks for earth, pot and sunlight. In the moment of clicking, all these requests were granted. The white-haired one had experience in caring for flowers, so she knew a lot about it. But the catch was that this seed grows within 2-3 days. So Ribe decides to make the seed mutate so that it will grow into a mutant monster, and only then would she have time to germinate. When Ribe has finished cooking, he smashes his hand on the coin and drips blood directly onto the seed. This was a prerequisite for mutation. In the moment we are transported to Adele, he had a light dialogue with a man in a robe, and judging by it, Adele was completely purple on the outcome of the argument. From what the man is very surprised. Time runs out and the guy starts announcing the winner, and it still becomes Adele. The idea of turning a seed into a monster didn't work, because there was only one problem. Nothing grew in Adele's world. There was no concept of growing or getting old. Going out on the street might have helped, but somehow it was Adele who won. In a world where all the usual laws of physics and chemistry are violated, there was no chance for Ribe to win. Now everything depends on Adele's request. But the hall is completely silent, but it is broken by Adele asking about what is happening. But the man in the robe explains that everything is normal and so it should be. Adele's conditions were fully fulfilled. Adele recalls her demand, but the peasant replies that he remembers everything and knows, you just need to wait. Ribe falls asleep, but Adele catches her, because the poor girl didn't sleep for a whole day. She fell asleep and fell down, and her whole right arm was torn and injured. Her efforts to cultivate the seed backfired with such consequences. She beat and beat until the skin tore and the veins burst, and her bones were visible on her clenched fist. Adele picked up the sleeping girl and laid her gently on the bed. But Ribe's sleep was heavy. She clutched Adele and repeated the same name, Maria. But Adele left her alone, and moving slightly away from her bed, he sat down to read a book. The man in the robe doubts the joy of Adele's victory, and then reminds that Ribe had a chance to win. And the peasant catches himself thinking that Adele specifically wanted to give the victory to Ribe. Asks questions about this, but Adele somehow dismisses these questions. As in one moment the peasant did not hit the ground in full, so much so that a crack formed in the space. That's how he got this out of Adele. I don't have a clear answer. Adele lights her cigarette and assures the man that the situation is now under his control, and also reminds him that the child has already been brought here. After these words, the same elf Maria appears next to the peasant, and then the man takes off his mask, and in a moment the space will turn into white flowers, and behind Adele a door appeared as black as the shadow itself. In the next chapter, everything starts with a fictional image of Ribe, all around with complete families, father, mother, and child, and only she is completely alone. Each of the families progresses their child in their own way, and again our Ribe is left alone, in the same place. And then the same bastard count appears in front of her, grabbing her by the hair and dragging the girl forward. At this point, she wakes up in a cold sweat and with a heavy shortness of breath. Having regained consciousness, she realizes her loss, but she cannot remember what happened next, until her thoughts are interrupted by the sound from her stomach. Because of a 2-day day without food, she is very hungry, but a delicious smell beckons her from the side. Turning to the source of the smell, she sees Adele cooking. The peasant who appeared from Adele's back greets her. The same one is naturally afraid of such sharpness, but the man in the robe assures that he is not her enemy, and the dispute is in the past. Besides, the same ring Adele confused with another, and Ribe does not have to tell about it, and he also added that the count is no longer an enemy. He'll be looking for her. Going further, it is realized that today is Darupin's birthday, and to this they say so while setting the table. Carrying a plate of cakes to the table, she wanted to take a bite, but Adele snatched the plate from her hand and handed her a sandwich, telling her not to get drunk. Everyone sits down at the table, and the moment of blowing out the candles comes. Having filled their lungs, Darupin blows out the cake with a strong blow, and then everyone together and amicably congratulates Darupin, and after that everyone also amicably eats a mouthful of food at the table. Adele notices a change in Ribe's face, and she smiles more often. We go back to the figurative representation, and there the count dragging the girl by the hair is replaced by Adele and a peasant. On the next page, Adele barely touches her food as she watches the girl. Ribe asks if she can stay here, but instead of answering, Adele just dries her out, gives her new clothes, and a place where she can just sleep. Adele spent his days reading his books, and in the evenings they gathered at the table and all four of them ate. But each time Ribe broke through to tears. And then it turns out that Adele does not like people because of their overly emotional nature. Further, Ribe helps Adele with household chores, and helps in any way she can. In the next page, Adele and Ribe are sitting in a place just chatting. And during the conversation, Ribe mentions to her parents that he hates them because they left her alone. But Adele replies that the name Ribe means love, and they wouldn't call their daughter by that name if they didn't love her. This brings the girl to tears. In the following days, as usual, the domestic situation passes, but one day they grab Adele by force and force him to cut his hair, after which Ribe safely goes to bed. And Adele, looking at the black door, thinks for a long time, until a man in a robe comes up to him and confirms Ribe's dream. He opens this black door and goes inside this space in the door. The next day, Ribe spends in search, and not finding him, he asks a peasant in a robe. He abruptly trembles, leads Ribe to that very huge black door, and then it is explained that Adele has never slept since he appeared here, and this is more than 100,000 years, and unable to withstand the pain and emotions he went into this black room, and there are only two ways out. Either he gets out or they get him out. At that moment, the door to this black space opens. The guy pushes the girl into this room, and finally tells her to find the reason why Adele does not go out there. Ribe falls completely into this dark space and is lost in it. Then Ribe opens her eyes, and chained in flails, she looks around, and realizes that she is surrounded by people in masks, and apparently she is the center of their attention. An unknown person appears and declares the slave market open, and lots for her begin, starting with 100 gold coins and ending with 12. But it ends up being bought for 10,000 gold by an unknown person in a black robe, and walking up to the cage and taking off his robe, it turns out to be the bastard count. In the next chapter, Adele is woken up by a blonde girl who is sleeping peacefully under a tree and introduces herself as a new member of the Demon King's subjugation team, and then she invites Adele to go with him, to which he simply ignores her. Then they were childish for a while, but still they went to the base of the Demon King's conquerors. The eyes on them there were very riveted, and the reason for this was too close physical contact between the blonde and Adele. Then a man took aim at them and tried to hurt Adele's pride with his words, but Adele ignored him as well as all the whispering people around him. Next to them comes a little boy. He had ash-white hair and huge glasses on his eyes. Panting, he ran to the door, blonde and Adele, and then greets them. Seeing this, the girl whispered in Adele's ear that they would meet later and left very quickly. Adele asks the boy if he knows her, and the boy answers, but there is no such name in Adele's memories. Walking through the base, Adele sees poverty and hunger all around, the inhabitants of the base barely making ends meet. Then it turns out that people don't want to live here at all, but they have to because of fear, followed by a loud noise behind in the base. there was a large monster attack directly on the base. In tears, begging for help, lay the same peasant who tried so hard to push Adele, but still Adele saves him. A retaliatory blow hits the monster squarely in the fist, and the monster loses its hand. Then Adele grabs it by the finger and sends it flying with a light movement. The finishing blow was not long in coming. One blow and the monster flies away into the stratosphere. On the following pages, the team of that guy had fun and just talked, until one of them showed Grusniavku. For him to catch the Demon King was something impossible, and all these thoughts were not dispersed by the white-haired grandfather. He said that the only weakness of the Demon King is physical attacks. Since the Demon King is invulnerable to magic, but still the king had great strength, and it was almost impossible to injure him, but there is one person whose physical parameters would allow you to defeat the Demon King, and that is Adele, or as he is otherwise called, Warrior 9, a weapon against the Demon King. It also goes on to say that Adele is a magician, but he is not one of the simple magicians, as his grandfather calls it. His magic is a fire, while other magics are just small lights. The rest ends, and everyone goes about their business, leaving my grandfather alone. A few moments later, the same yellow-haired girl appears behind grandfather and introduces herself to grandfather as a fan of Adele who strives for perfection. In the next chapter, we return to Reba, at which point she finds out who the man in black is. In fear, Ribe presses herself against the wall of the cage, trying to get as far away from the Duke as possible. All this stops the sounds of beeping, and this turns out to be Darupen. By poking Darupen, the Duke angers him, and he pours all that anger out and destroys everything around him. Ribe opens her eyes and it all turns out to be just her dream, which was quite realistic. Thanks and praising Darupen, Ribe goes in search of Adele in this darkness. Then we see Adele chatting with the lilac-haired blacksmith. Adele thanking the blacksmith for his advice. The atmosphere gets heavy, and the blacksmith mentions to his son that he wants to be the next warrior. And then he passes on a picture that he made with his son. Blood spills from the blacksmith's mouth, and he informs about his serious illness, which will soon take his life. And finally, the blacksmith asks for one favor. After he defeats the Demon King, tell his child that he was a good person. This child's name was Taku, Kim Tak-ku. Going out on the street and passing into the depths of the base, Adele thinks about the chances of winning. But his thoughts are interrupted by partying in the very center of the base. The organizer of this all turned out to be a yellow-haired girl. She apologizes to Adele because she just wanted to cheer up this sad bunch of people. In tears, she asked him for forgiveness, which has raised a stir around. The girl snuggled up to Adele, and still sobbing, she told him that these people were around. They don't like her very much either. At this, the image of a blacksmith came to the guy's mind, so Adele decided to help her, grabbed a mug of beer and took tight sips to a single drop. Days passed and the girl helped everyone around to have fun. Changes were in full swing, because there is no longer that dull life as in the past. And one day Adele gives a white flower to the yellow-haired one as a gift. Putting a flower in her hair, she began to look even brighter, which made Adele confused. The girl leaves saying goodbye to Adele, and left alone with her thoughts. From his thoughts we learn that Adele still likes this girl and this flower was his first step towards her. But at the same time, the Demon King was closer than ever, waiting to meet Adele. A decisive battle 10 days. All these 10 days were spent in full preparation, training, new equipment and weapons. Everything was done in the shortest possible time, and on the last day they go on the road for the head of the Demon King. Finally, when they meet, Adele pulls out her weapon, and from the dialogue, it was clear that at one time Adele considered the Demon King a friend, but now Adele is ready to step over all this. In the next page, we go to the girl Reba. She reaches the pendant, which contains a photo of Adele with yellow hair. Stuffing it in her pocket, she goes on her way. Now that we're back to the battle between Adele and the Demon King, it was clear that the demon was just running away from Adele without really trying to start a fight. But one moment he shoots a beam directly at Adele, but he is saved by a miracle of Adele's armor. The next moment the Demon King is in a tight fit to Adele and telling about his long training. He just played and dodged Adele's attacks. At the moment a huge monster appears behind the guy, and in attempts to kill RGG, he makes a strong swing. But fortunately at the last moment Adele is saved by his grandfather and that peasant. They took on a huge monster, allowing Adele to go ahead for the demon. The demon casts a dirty attack on him with his helpers, but the blacksmith distracts them, opening the way to the king. The Demon King lured Adele into a trap, and a crowd of demons formed in front of him. But Adele is not so easy to take. He recreates a new sword and destroys the surrounding king's henchmen in an instant. After finishing with everyone, Adele challenges the king himself to battle, provoking him. A whole bunch of rays surrounded our boy, but in the next page we go to Reba, who still managed to find Adele. The next frame, and we return to the battlefield of the grandfather and the peasant against the monster. Attack after attack, he broke through their defense. But the grandfather at the moment was able to catch the moment and chop off the monster's whole head. But this was not the end. In addition to the monster around, there were many demons who surrounded these two. At this moment his life runs through my eyes. He had devoted his entire life to fencing, but still lost everything he held dear, and plunged into complete drunkenness, everyone around him judging his lifestyle, even his own wife. But the quest to kill the Demon King was a lifesaver for him. Delving into these memories, the grandfather fought until his last breath, until his hand in which he tightly gripped the sword was simply chopped off. In the end, he still accepted death, and with a slight smile, he died at the hands of demons. Next comes a peasant. His life was also particularly unsuccessful. He did not have parents, they died. But he did not lose heart and continued to live, spending every day at work and working until the seventh sweat. He looked at his life with a smile. But having lost all his work, he is faced with his salvation, the task of catching the Demon King. Returning to the present, the peasant saves his grandfather. But in the end, his grandfather dies in front of him. In the next chapter, we move on to 2 hours earlier at this point. Pink-haired and Afro chatted about their own, and about their plan B, a plan that would help her survive in case of something. They both promise each other to survive this massacre. But moving into the present, we see how Pink-haired is deeply wounded. Taking her in his arms, he goes to the horse. Opening the horse's bag, she climbs inside. As we can see, it turns out to be a bag full of ice. In the next moment, we see her past. Her parents are dead, and only she and his sick brother are left. She often played with him until her brother's illness was advanced and money was needed to treat him. The pink-haired girl only saw one rescue. This is a mission to capture the Demon King. Coming back to the present, we learn that she wanted to save her body for a full organ donation for her little brother, and there was so much love for that purpose. The horse ran forward without looking back, forward to the hospital where her little brother lay. But at the moment of bang, she is crushed by a huge demon without even noticing, right in front of Afro's eyes. In an attempt at revenge, he is killed in the wake of the pink-haired girl. In the next shot, we see this team together again. They all understood their own. They were useless in battle and were willing to die just to give Adele a second or two to get to the king, because killing him would save their loved ones. The next chapter starts with the battle between the king and Adele, which looks like it was a long fight, but our guy had a plan. Adele creates the swords of creation with her magic, and the Demon King just laughs, completely opening himself up to the attack, and decides to accept Adele's magic strike. Although Adele's magic is still working against the king, it's not like he can't see through his body. Adele knocks the demon down for a moment, and holds her sword to its throat, demanding its surrender. Deciding that he has won, Adele loses her vigilance, which is used by the Demon King and creates a huge blood-red ball in the sky. From the very beginning, the Demon King delayed the fight and just played around, focusing his power in this ball, and now this ball has the power to destroy everything around it. Adele was now faced with the choice of either leaving or completely destroying everyone in the area. Our boy decided to try something for a last chance, but he is interrupted by the Demon King, and a blood-red ball shoots out. So ends the 10th battle of the Demon King with a warrior, and this time the king wins again. In the next chapter, we see how Adele was able to survive, but all the people around him were killed. The beam destroyed everyone, leaving no one alive. Adele goes to an unknown destination, and each time encounters the corpses of her allies, until she reaches the yellow-haired one, wanting blood, dead. In all this tragedy, Adele begins to blame herself and only herself. And that was the first day Adele decided to commit murder. The Demon King, who was standing nearby, just grinned at this and was somewhat happy, because the fun of the fight has just begun for him. Only within a second the king's head is torn off from his body. The Demon King was killed by Adele. Chapter 20 begins with Adele lying among the corpses. Adele begged for forgiveness from his former comrades. He considered all these deaths on his burden, and that only he was responsible for these deaths of innocent people. As the years passed, Adele was still there, still begging for forgiveness in the downpour, until the white door appeared in front of him. Adele promised himself to remember everyone who died because of his fault and atone for it.